Luther Burden is still recovering from soft tissue injuries he suffered earlier this offseason, and now it's starting to become a problem.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, I want to check in on the injury situation involving second-round rookie wide receiver Luther Burden and why it's starting to become concerning given how it seemed to be a pretty minor injury that continues to linger and is now disrupting the real, actually important training camp practices. So we'll get an update from Ben Johnson about what Burden's been able to do and what the timeline might look like from here. From there, we'll look at what that could mean for his role in this Bears offense this season, and if maybe that means there's going to be more opportunities for some other players to step up and take advantage of where Burden isn't able to take on more responsibility. And one of those players may be tight end Colston Loveland. And I want to talk about his development so far and pay close attention to the differences in the way that Ben Johnson talks about him versus Luther Burden. But let's start with Burden because it's too early to totally panic on the panic meter here. We don't want to overreact to early injury issues, but it's getting to the point now where it's a real concern, right? When he's missing OTAs and mandatory minicamp stuff, it's not ideal, but not the end of the world. Those practices are valuable, especially for a rookie, but as long as you're ready to go by training camp, it's pretty easy to catch up on what you missed there. As long as you're in for training camp, you're good to go. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. But now that we've reached the point that training camp practices are starting and Luther Burden is still not able to go out there with his team, now it starts to be a concern, especially because the nature of the injury, right? This is not supposed to be a long-term significant injury. Our understanding, and media doesn't get access to every practice, but the reporting was that at one point, Luther Burden fell onto a football awkwardly or landed on a football while jumping in the air. He landed. I don't know if it was a fall, but he landed on the football awkwardly, and that was the start of some soft tissue injury. Now, we don't know the exact details, hamstring, quad, calf, whatever it might be, but it was understandable that, hey, it's OTAs and minicamp, so let's just sit him down. No reason to push it. Let him try and recover fully, and we'll hit training camp strong. And even at the end of mandatory minicamp, Ben Johnson said, yep, we're expecting him to be full go for training camp. And now training camp comes around, and he's still not recovered. And it's been more than a month. It's been at least 6 weeks. It might have been, I don't know. I don't have an exact date on when he fell on the football, when the soft tissue injuries started. It wasn't pre-draft, right? He did rookie minicamp, but somewhere in May, this injury occurred, and now we're in late July. That's a really long time for a soft tissue type of deal. We don't know exactly what it is. I'm not a doctor. You're probably not a doctor. I can't put a medical timeline on it, right? But it'd be one thing if it was I don't know, a sprained ankle, a high ankle sprain, right? In season, we think of that a 4 to 6 week type of injury. Something like that, maybe it would still be a concern, but a different kind of concern because at least there's a known timetable there and the recovery is matching the severity of the injury. But the more there's a discrepancy between what was supposed to be a minor thing that's now becoming a less minor thing, the more concern there is. Now, Ben Johnson thinks Burden, in theory, should be back really soon, maybe even just a couple more days, but they thought he'd be back by training camp, so it's a little bit hard to trust whether he'll actually be back in a couple more days or not. At least he's been able to do some work on the side, and head coach Ben Johnson explained kind of what Burden's been able to do and where they think things are at right now.
With Luther, because we're not here every day during the off-season program, how much work did he get in May and June, and how much catching up is going to be involved when he is available?
Everything that our training staff is telling us we can do physically with them, we're utilizing. I know Coach Randallell's been all over them in meetings, keeping them involved. He's being quizzed nonstop. Our quarterbacks are taking them to the side, whether it's walkthroughs on their own. So he's utilizing that time as much as he can, but there's really no substitute for full speed reps. And so the sooner we get him out there, the quicker he can carve a role for himself.
Do you think it's a matter of days, weeks?
Yeah, I'm hopeful it's just a few days. We're saying day to day right now. Sometimes those soft tissues, you can't predict. Everyone's a little bit different. Some guys take longer than others. So, like I said, just was hopeful, and we'll keep on trucking on along.
So on a scale from 1 to Kevin White, I don't think we need to panic and worry that this is going to be this disastrous thing for Luther Burden's career or anything. But I do think it's getting important enough that we need to keep a close eye on this and say, okay, it's supposed to just be a couple more days. So, if by Monday, if Luther Burden's still not back out there, then we should be more concerned. And if we get to, next Friday, a full week, I guess they started training camp on Wednesday, right? So even next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it's been a full week of training camp practices. Luther Burden's still not out there. All of a sudden becomes that much more concerning. I mean, maybe he's good by Sunday and it's all behind him and we're ready to go, but I just can't help but worry about this thing recurring and coming back. And we talked about this a little bit earlier this week on the podcast. I'm actually struggling to remember if we were talking about it with Braxton Jones. No, Jalen Johnson. We talked about this with Jalen Johnson earlier in the week, where it's sometimes with soft tissue kind of stuff, you worry that it never quite gets to 100%, and they kind of just play through it, and you're not missing games per se, but you're just not 100% out there, and it kind of keeps popping up and keeps giving you problems, and you feel like, boy, he really started the whole rookie year off poorly and on the wrong foot with this injury that maybe he's going to linger the whole time and never really go away. We just don't know. It depends on how his body's going to recover, but the fact that it's taken this long doesn't give me confidence that all of a sudden he's going to be 100% 2 days from now, right? And there's going to have to be then a ramp-up period, and the longer this takes, the more he misses, the less time he's going to get working with Caleb Williams and building that chemistry, working through the route concepts and the terminology in this Bears offense. Yes, Ben Johnson said he's went through the stuff that he's been able to do and been able to work on, but there's nothing that can truly replicate being out there, running those routes, catching those passes from the quarterback. Because we even saw last season with Caleb as a rookie, it took late into the season before the timing issues weren't as big of a deal with, Keenan Allen and certainly Rome Odunze was a long-running thing of them trying to get on the same page. And so I'm worried about the same type of thing happening with Luther Burden. The good news is they don't need Luther Burden to be one of their top playmakers. It would be nice, and you're hoping for it. It would add a lot to have him. But even if they hadn't drafted Luther Burden, let's go with that hypothetical, the offense would still be fine with the other receivers that they have. And so I want to explore, okay, if Burden's going to still be dealing with this injury thing for a little while, what could that do to affect his role in the offense? And could that create some more opportunities for some other players on offense? We'll explore some of the ripple effects of Luther Burden's injury situation next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress, because ticket prices actually go down the closer you get to first pitch or kickoff or whatever game you're going to. And Gametime has incredible last-minute deals where you can see the view from your seat before you buy your ticket, so you know exactly what you're getting, and the lowest price guarantee takes the worry out of the buying process. I've got the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time. I used to go concerts, comedy shows. I've been to Bears games on Gametime. I've been to a couple of baseball games this summer. It's a great ticket buying experience, and I'm always saving a ton of money. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So if Luther Burden is slow to get back, however much time he misses, there's going to be a ramp up period from there. He's going to be playing catch up here. And so that could lead to a smaller role in the Bears offense this season than maybe we initially anticipated, which also means more playing time for other players at his position. And I think those are sort of two separate things. It's like, what does Luther Burden's role look like? And then what does that mean for the role of other weapons in the offense? Because I think when they drafted Burden with the 39th overall pick in the second round, I mean, of course, we were surprised he was there and really excited about the potential he has. This is a first-round caliber wide receiver the Bears got in the second round, and it was like, wow, this is some real talent. Like, yes, he's going to be number 3 behind DJ Moore and Rome Odunze because he's coming as a rookie. He's a second-round pick. Like, he's not going to usurp those guys right out of the gate, but still someone that you feel like can provide the sort of speed and playmaking ability with the ball in his hands to be a real threat and a real factor in this Bears offense right away this season. Maybe not, we don't want to get carried away with, like we talked about last offseason when Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze talked about the race to 1,000 yards and trying to have 3,000-yard receivers. Like, let's not, we were trying not to make Luther Burden a potential 1,000-yard rookie wide receiver in year one. Like, we were more reasonable with expectations there, but the more time he misses, I think the lower those expectations go, because there's a lot of intricacies to being a receiver in this offense. In addition to just like precise route running and timing, which is something that Ben Johnson is drilling over and over with Caleb Williams on his footwork. So of course the receivers get that over and over with their footwork and timing, but also he's talked a lot about, no block, no rock. You got to be able to be a big part of the running game and be physical out there. And, Luther Burden is known more for his playmaking speed. I don't think he's like a bad blocker per se, but 6 foot, 200 pounds, you think he's got the ability to be out there and do that, but you got to be out there and show them that at practice when the pads are on, right? Like, that's why these are more important than even just OTAs and minicamp that he already missed, because you're kind of running routes on air and they're not full contact anyway. But like, Burden needs to get up to speed and be a big part of if he wants to be a big part of this Bears offense. But it feels to me like as he misses more time, that role shrinks. And it makes sense given like how much else the Bears did at wide receiver this season, that like this offseason, that maybe it's possible we were overestimating Burden's role a little bit anyway. I mean, they signed a veteran like Olamide Zaccheaus in free agency, and before they had drafted Luther Burden, we were all penciling in Zaccheaus as the number 3 wide receiver. And he had 500 yards last season for the Washington Commanders. Like, he's a 45 catch guy. Like, that's a solid number 3, clearly a slot receiver at 5'8", 190-ish pounds. Like, he's a good football player. He's not a Pro Bowler. He's not a star who's going to take over games, but a solid, reliable number 3 that we thought was really good value. And so all of a sudden, if your options are a really exciting rookie who's maybe a little behind the 8 ball, or a really solid, high floor, low ceiling veteran, like right now, the goal is to have the best possible offense. So does somebody like Zaccheaus start to get more of those opportunities and operate more like the number 3 receiver and rotate in with Luther Burden a lot more than maybe we would have initially anticipated? You also have, Tyler Scott's still a part of this wide receiver group. I think he's still got a spot on this 53-man roster and still has some untapped potential that he could potentially try and get into. And then they signed Devin Duvernay as well, who's going to be more of a return guy, but he's got some speed and playmaking ability with the ball in his hands. Like, any of these 6 could all be a part of this Bears offense. And so if Burden is still learning his role and can't take as much of that, there's more opportunities for Zaccheaus especially, but maybe Scott or Duvernay. And I think really like the big opportunity difference here might not even be, a different number 3 receiver is going to play more, but it's just that you're only going to have 2 wide receivers on the field more. That maybe if Luther Burden isn't as advanced as they initially wanted him to be by week 1 because of injury, then you use fewer wide receivers. You just have a lot of DJ Moore and Rome Dunze with 2 wide receivers on the field, and then that's more snaps for Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland, or it's more snaps to get multiple running backs in the game at the same time. That's something the Lions did more last season with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery both in the backfield, whereas in the Bears offense last season, we almost never saw multiple running backs. It was almost always just DeAndre Swift or just Roschon Johnson, and then sometimes just Travis Homer, but it was very, very rare that you saw multiple running backs in the game. And I wonder if Ben Johnson could opt to say, could you line up DeAndre Swift at a wide receiver position on a play? And then, you're not having him run wide receiver routes necessarily, but then you can motion him into the backfield, or you could run a screen pass to him out at receiver or a jet sweep. I mean, there's different ways Ben Johnson can get creative with his personnel to make it confusing for the defense on, okay, who's lining up where and at what position. Or you can get the shotgun and put both of those backs back there, and you can have Swift run a route and Roschon stay in the pass protect, right? There's a lot of different ways you can do this. And given how Ben Johnson operated in Detroit without really having a special number 3 receiver, right? It was like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams are their big dynamic duo. And then Tim Patrick was a fine number 3. Tim Patrick was a Olamide Zaccheaus caliber type of player. Maybe even a little bit better, but not a Luther Burden dynamic athlete kind of player. And so maybe Ben Johnson ends up going with even more 2 tight end sets and 2 running back sets with just 2 wide receivers instead of the variety of 3 wide receiver sets that maybe we were anticipating with Luther Burden. Like maybe you end up getting a little bit more of a gadget type role for Burden. And I don't want to reduce him to just being a gadget player as a rookie. Like I don't think it's going to be like, that's an oversimplification, but Luther Burden's best skill set that the Bears kept talking about is yards after catch, right? Playmaking with the ball in his hands. He's also a good route runner. He's got great speed. I mean, he can get open. But like, if you want to just keep it simple because he's missing training camp time, you throw him screens, you give him jet sweeps, crossing routes over the middle of the field. Like you're not going to, maybe you don't ask him to run as many double moves or option routes that require really precise timing with the quarterback, but you just get the ball in his hands quickly and let him run. And maybe even put him in the backfield sometimes. There's been some talk of that as well. So like, I don't think it has to mean like, Luther Burden is going to be useless for his rookie season because he might have a smaller role for missing some training camp. Like, I just think it's going to require some fine tuning for Ben Johnson. And maybe we need to dial down our expectations for him and dial up our expectations for some of the other guys who could take a little bit more of his playing time. And I think someone in particular who is in this category that I want to dive into a little bit more deeper is Colston Loveland, because he's someone who I've tried to dial down expectations for because of the injury situation. But like now that he's back and good to go for training camp, I do think, especially when combined with the opportunities from Burden potentially reducing, that maybe there's more for Loveland this season than maybe I overcorrected a little bit. So I want to specifically hear about how Ben Johnson talks about Colston Loveland in a way that to me was maybe even more revealing than what we heard about Luther Burden next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back, so fire up the group chat, get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we live for. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. I play fantasy football on Yahoo, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. They're celebrating 28 years of fantasy greatness this year, so Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. It all begins on August 4th. Stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. And let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. So as Luther Burden's role reduces, I think there's going to be more opportunity for Colston Loveland. And the way Ben Johnson talks about Loveland is a noticeably different tone from how he talks about Luther Burden. And I've been trying to pay more attention to ignoring the coaching cliches that they all say and trying to find some of the real substance in even like just how they talk about a player and the differences between how they talk about certain players. And I can't help but wonder if maybe he's got even more in store for Luther Burden than I wanted to give him credit for. Because so often in the NFL, rookie tight ends start a little bit on the slow side. Like Brock Bowers this past season is the exception, not the rule. We've talked multiple times on this podcast about, generally speaking, rookie tight ends don't have huge breakout first seasons, especially on teams like the Bears that already have an established veteran. That usually, with him being the backup, he's coming in as the backup tight end. That's not going to be 1,000-yard season as the backup tight end. And okay, maybe he surpasses Cole Kmet at some point during the season, but he's not starting week one as your number one tight end. And so that's why I've wanted to like sort of slow down on the Luther or the Colston Loveland expectations, especially when you add in the fact that he missed OTA's minicamp and stuff with the injury, and that there was some potential that maybe he wouldn't be ready for training camp. Now that he's ready for training camp, he'll catch up just fine, and he should be a real factor, a major factor in the Chicago Bears offense. I don't know from a fantasy football standpoint if that means, how many yards that means, but I think it's invaluable here to like listen to the way Ben Johnson talks about Colston Loveland here in a way that like I don't think he sounded negative about Luther Burden earlier, right? I didn't hear a lot of tone of like disappointment in the injuries. It's more just like, hey, this is the reality and we're working through it. But there's a certain gushing about Colston Loveland here that sounds like Ben Johnson is having trouble kind of holding in his excitement about Loveland because he sees it coming together and has this vision of what it's going to look like. And I think the contrast here is important.
What do you expect out of Colston in his recovery from this injury? And how long does it take for a rookie who's never been at this level, who's never played with Caleb before, to just kind of feel comfortable in what you guys are doing?
Everyone's different. Everyone's completely different. I can tell you from the moment he's gotten into the building, I'm just blown away by how he approaches everything. I mean, I don't think there's a guy I saw in the building more this summer than him, and it's really a credit for who he wants to be as he continues to he's attacking the rehab hard. He wants to be a factor here this fall.
Right. There's a certain difference there when you have both Colston Loveland and Luther Burden missed a bunch of time. And he talked about the things Luther Burden was doing on the side, and he talked about the things Colston Loveland was doing on the side. And there was a very clear difference in what he said about what Loveland was doing versus what Burden was doing. And that to me means a lot in this conversation that like, oh no, this kid is absolutely going to be ready for whatever they expect of him this upcoming season. And so I think it lends to what we were talking about in the last segment with Burden and a bigger role for Loveland as a result, in the sense that like, I think when the Bears went in to the draft this year, they knew 10th overall pick, who's likely going to be there. I think they went into this draft with a pretty good idea that they might land a tight end with the 10th overall pick, that Ashton Genty might not make it there, and the offensive tackles they wanted might not make it there. Like they probably would have taken one of those guys instead of Loveland, but they also were probably realistic going into this saying, hey, good chance our pick ends up being Loveland. What do we want to do with that? How can we get excited about that? Right? I think it wasn't as though they went in draft day saying we got to make this our number one priority, but it was like something that they could anticipate and build around and build towards. Whereas I think Luther Burden was a little bit more of a, wow, we did not expect him to be there, but we'll take it. Like Burden as a draft pick, I think was a bit more like, I don't want to like downplay him, but like extra, right? Like he was a bonus that maybe they weren't expecting. Like, it's become pretty clear through the draft reporting afterwards that the Bears wanted to take a running back with that 39th pick. They did not go into the draft saying, hey, we're going to get a tight end in the first round and then a wide receiver in the second round. It played out that way. They're happy to have Luther Burden, but in the same sense, like, they weren't counting on having Luther Burden in some of the same ways that they may have been counting on having Colston Loveland. Like, to me, it's pretty clear that Colston Loveland is a player Ben Johnson views as like his version of Sam Laporta in Chicago, right? There's a very kind of specific role and skill set Colston Loveland provides that the Chicago Bears did not have at the tight end position. Whereas Luther Burden also has, a skill set that they don't have a receiver quite like him, but like, it's not like Luther Burden lands in this perfect role in the offense. Like DJ Moore and Rome Odunze can be what Ben Johnson needs them to be in terms of not one-to-one comparisons, but like versions of Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams, right? Like I think Luther Burden in that regard is a little bit more expendable and less necessary to the offensive success of the Chicago Bears. Whereas Ben Johnson and even Ryan Poles has talked about like having two tight ends like this that are major threats as pass catchers and reliable as blockers opens up so much more for your offense in these two tight end sets. And that opens up even more than having a great speedy playmaking receiver like Luther Burden. That opens up a lot too, but not in the same ways and not as critical to the function of the offensive identity. Like that at the end of the day is why like it's easier for me to see Luther Burden's role shrinking a little bit, because as much as they want to get they want to get as much as they can out of Luther Burden, of course, but it's less important to the success of the team that Luther Burden get up to speed and be a big part of this offense than it is Colston Loveland get up to speed and be a big part of this offense. And so that to me is where I think you hear Ben Johnson's smile, his energy, his excitement about his tight end. And maybe you don't hear it as much about Luther Burden. And that's not to be any sort of, judgment on Burden or indictment on his career, him as a player. But it's just like, no, I think Loveland's going to do some real stuff this season. And maybe Burden's going to do a bit less. And that's okay. And a lot of that's just based on injury and something that we're definitely going to need to keep a close eye on here in the coming days and weeks on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure then that you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I promise one of these days, we do got to get to Caleb Williams, his footwork, his development, his expectations, his goals, something I been wanting to get to on the podcast here, but more pressing new stuff keeps popping up. I'm thinking Monday, unless something big happens over the weekend, we're going to talk about Caleb Williams at Chicago Bears training camp. So make sure you come back on Monday. Make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.